Hey everyone, my name is Carlos. I'm 28 years old and I'm from Mexico. 6 months ago, I couldn't speak a complete sentence in English without struggling. I couldn't even say, "What's your name?" without pausing and thinking for several seconds. I was completely overwhelmed. Today I want to share how I went from zero to fluent in English in just 6 months, without expensive courses, without traveling to an English-speaking country, and without wasting time on ineffective methods. But this isn't just my story. This is also your story if you've ever felt frustrated, stuck, or embarrassed because of your English level. Keep watching because I was exactly where you are now, and I guarantee that if you follow my complete journey step by step, you'll know exactly how to transform your English skills. So let's go back to the beginning, because my journey didn't start with inspiration. It started with a crushing failure that completely changed my life. The moment that transformed everything. I had always dreamed of working for a multinational corporation. My ultimate goal was to become a marketing manager at a global company. I loved business strategy, I was talented at it, and I worked tirelessly to become the best. Finally, after years of dedication, I got my opportunity. I applied for an amazing position at a major company in Canada. The recruiter sent me an email saying, "Congratulations, you've been selected for an interview." I was thrilled. I imagined myself in a new country, earning an excellent salary, working with the most talented people. But then the interview took place. I remember it as if it happened yesterday. I opened Zoom and saw 3 interviewers, all native English speakers. They began talking, and I felt like someone had put their conversation on double speed. I couldn't understand a single word. They asked me the first question. "Carlos, could you tell us about yourself and your experience in marketing?" I froze. I knew the answer perfectly in my mind, but the words wouldn't come out. I stammered, yes, I am. Marketing person. I do, many campaigns. Good. I am very good." They stared at me. The silence felt like a dagger through my heart. They asked another question, but I couldn't respond to that one either. Finally, one of them smiled politely and said, "All right, Carlos, thank you for your time." I knew exactly what that meant. I had failed. Not because I wasn't qualified for the position, but because I couldn't communicate in English. That day, I understood the true power of English. It wasn't just a language. It was the gateway to my dreams. And at that moment, I didn't possess that key. I felt humiliated, embarrassed, and furious with myself. For years, I had told myself, "I don't need English. I'll just excel at my job, and that will be sufficient." But now I faced reality. Without English, I was invisible. That night, I made a commitment. I would master English, and I would do it quickly. Most people, when they decide to learn English, make one mistake first. They pay for expensive programs. But I didn't do that. Why? Because I had already tried them before, and they hadn't worked. A year earlier, I had paid for an online English academy. The instructor made me memorize vocabulary lists, complete grammar exercises, and study tedious rules. But after 3 months, when I attempted to have a conversation, I still couldn't speak. So I knew that expensive courses weren't the solution. If I wanted to learn English rapidly, I needed something different. I needed a system that worked in real life. And that's when I developed my 6-month method, which I'll share with you now, step by step. Phase 1, the first 2 weeks. The biggest mistake beginners make is thinking they need more vocabulary. I thought the same thing. I believed if I learned 2,000 words, I would speak fluently. But the reality is I already knew hundreds of words, yet I still couldn't speak. So for the first 2 weeks, I didn't study any new vocabulary. Instead, I did something much more effective. I started learning how to use the words I already knew. Here's exactly what I did. First, I created a survival phrase collection. I sat down and considered what I actually need to say every day. I wrote down 60 simple phrases that I needed in real life. For example, "Hello, how are you? Could you repeat that? I don't understand. I'm learning English. I'd like some coffee, please." Every morning I read these 60 phrases aloud. Not once, not twice, 15 times. Initially, my mouth felt clumsy, but after a week, these phrases became automatic. Second, I began talking to myself in English every single day. This was one of the most powerful things I did. Whenever I was alone, I spoke English to myself. For example, when I was in the shower, I said, "I'm taking a shower, the water is warm, I feel refreshed." When I prepared lunch, I said, "I'm making pasta, I enjoy pasta, it's simple to prepare." At first, I felt ridiculous, but then I realized this was my private practice room. No one could hear me, no one could criticize me, and within just 1 week, my brain began thinking in English. Third, I practiced 6 phrases daily, but with a special technique. Every day I selected 6 phrases from movies or authentic conversations, but I didn't just read them. I imitated them exactly. I repeated them 15 times, matching the same emotion, speed, and pronunciation as the native speaker. This helped me correct my accent and sound natural. By the end of the first 2 weeks, something shifted. I stopped translating in my mind. I could produce basic phrases without thinking. I felt more confident. But this was only the beginning, because after 2 weeks, I started the real training. Phase 2, the real training begins. After 2 weeks of correcting my fundamental mistake, I was finally ready for the next level. I could produce basic phrases without thinking, and I felt more confident, but I knew this wasn't sufficient. I didn't want to just say short phrases. I wanted to have genuine conversations. I wanted to understand native speakers without translating in my head. I wanted to speak fluently. So I developed a new strategy. This strategy would change everything. If you implement it, you will improve faster than you ever imagined possible. I discovered something crucial. When I tried to speak English, my brain was sluggish. I knew words but couldn't combine them quickly. I needed a way to make speaking feel effortless. I began using a method I now call the question-response technique. This method is simple but powerful. Here's how it functions. First, I asked myself a simple question in English. Second, I answered it immediately without overthinking. Third, I repeated the process with different responses. For example, I started with an easy question. What did you do today? Initially, my answer was brief. I worked. But I forced myself to elaborate. I worked on my project. I worked on my project for 4 hours. I worked on my project for 4 hours, then I took a break. I worked on my project for 4 hours, then I took a break and had some tea. Each time I answered, I added more details. This trained my brain to think in English and speak without hesitation. Another example. What did you have for lunch? First answer, I had soup. Then, I had soup and bread. I had soup, bread, and an apple. I had soup, bread, and an apple because I was extremely hungry. I had soup, bread, and an apple because I was extremely hungry, and I enjoy eating nutritious meals. I did this every single day for at least 45 minutes. My speaking speed improved dramatically. My sentences became longer, and I stopped translating in my mind. One of my major challenges was pronunciation. Even when I spoke English, I still sounded like a foreigner. Native speakers understood me, but my accent was thick. So I used the mirror technique. This is the most effective way to improve pronunciation without an instructor. Here's how it works. First, I listen to a native speaker from movies, YouTube, or podcasts. Second, I pause the audio after each sentence. Third, I repeated the sentence exactly the same way. Same speed, same tone, same emotion. For example, I took a short clip from a TV show. The actor said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I paused and repeated, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Initially, it felt challenging, but after repeating it 12 times, my voice began to sound similar to the native speaker. Another example from a podcast. The weather was perfect, so I decided to take a long walk. I paused and repeated, "The weather was perfect, so I decided to take a long walk." I did this every day for 45 minutes. After 6 weeks, my pronunciation improved so dramatically that even native speakers began saying, "Wow, your English sounds really authentic." I understood that vocabulary was important, but I also knew that memorizing word lists doesn't work. So I needed a superior method. I used the narrative method. Here's how it works. First, I took 6 new words every day. Second, I created a brief story using all 6 words. Third, I read the story aloud 12 times. Fourth, I used the words in my actual conversations. Example, new words. Thrilled, invitation, celebration, arrive, unexpected. My story, I was thrilled because I received an invitation to a big celebration. When I arrived at the celebration, I got an unexpected surprise. It was my promotion party. I did this every day. After 4 months, I had learned over 1,500 new words without memorizing anything. One of the major problems learners face is that they think in their native language first, then translate into English. This makes speaking slow and unnatural. So I trained my brain to think in English directly. Here's how. First, I described everything around me in English. Example, when I walked outside, I said in my mind, "The sky is clear, the weather is pleasant. I see people jogging. That woman is wearing a yellow jacket." Second, I asked myself questions and answered in English. Example, what am I doing right now? I am sitting at my desk, drinking water, and writing in my journal. Third, I wrote my daily journal in English. Every evening I wrote about my day in English. Initially I wrote simple sentences, but after 6 weeks my writing became more sophisticated. After a few weeks, I noticed something incredible. I was no longer translating. English thoughts came naturally into my mind. One thing I did was simple but transformative. I made a rule. Every day I had to speak English for at least 3 hours. No exceptions. If I had no one to talk to, I talked to myself. If I didn't have time, I spoke while doing daily activities, cooking, cleaning, walking. If I felt unmotivated, I reminded myself, English is my future. I cannot surrender. Phase 3, my final breakthrough. Now that I had established the habit of listening and repeating, I wanted to challenge myself further. But I also realized something very important. Just listening and speaking wouldn't be sufficient if I didn't understand the grammar and structure of English properly. I didn't want to make errors that could confuse people, and I definitely wanted to sound more natural. I began observing how native speakers structured their sentences. Every time I heard a sentence, I didn't just repeat it. I asked myself, why is this sentence structured like this? For example, I heard people say, "I have been studying English for 6 months." But in school I had learned, "I am studying English for 6 months." That was my first major realization. The English we learn in school is often different from the English people actually speak. So I started researching the differences. I learned about tenses in real-life usage. When do people use the present perfect tense? Why do they say, "I have been studying," instead of, "I am studying"? I discovered that small details like these made a huge difference in sounding natural. I wrote down common sentence patterns and tried using them in my daily practice. One of my biggest challenges was prepositions. On the bus, but in the car. Why? At night, but in the morning. Why? I kept a small notebook and wrote down confusing prepositions with examples. Whenever I had doubts, I researched answers online or listened to how native speakers use them. To advance further, I started writing a daily diary in English. Every evening, I wrote about my day. Initially, my writing was very simple. Today I went to work. I was tired. I ate tacos. They were delicious. But I wanted to improve, so I asked myself, how do native speakers write? I read blogs, books, and news articles, and I noticed how they structured their sentences. Then I tried to copy that style in my diary. One thing that really accelerated my learning was echo practice. I found videos of native speakers, put on headphones, and repeated every word immediately after them, matching their speed and pronunciation. I did this for at least 30 minutes daily. In just a few weeks, my pronunciation improved dramatically. Another strategy that helped me was watching English movies with subtitles, but instead of just watching passively, I paused after every sentence and repeated it. I focused on pronunciation, tone, and rhythm. Slowly, my English began sounding more natural. At this stage, I realized something crucial. English is not just about words and grammar, it's also about confidence. Many people know English but are too scared to speak. I made a decision. I would not be afraid of making mistakes. I started speaking to people in English whenever I got the opportunity. At work, at the store, with friends. I spoke even when I was uncertain, and I noticed something surprising. People understood me even if I made small errors. They didn't laugh at me. This gave me the confidence to continue. But then I faced my greatest fear, talking to native English speakers. I was terrified that they wouldn't understand me or that I would freeze completely. So I developed a strategy. I prepared 12 common conversation topics and practiced them every day. How was your day? What do you do for work? What's your favorite hobby? I practiced answering these questions fluently. Then I took the leap. I joined an online community where people from different countries practiced English. Initially, I was nervous, but soon I realized everyone was there to learn, just like me. I made friends from different countries, and we practiced together. This not only improved my English, but also made learning enjoyable. As I reached the final stage of my English learning journey, I felt an unshakable confidence growing inside me. I was no longer the same person who had been rejected because of poor English skills. I had transformed myself step by step through consistent effort, practice, and the right mindset. Now I want to share the final and most important lessons I learned so that you too can achieve fluency. One day I was speaking to myself in the mirror, as I had done so many times before, but this time something was different. I wasn't hesitating. I wasn't translating in my head. The words were flowing naturally. It felt like magic, but in reality, it was the result of months of effort. That same day, I decided to test my progress by having a deep conversation with a native speaker. I joined an online meeting where people from different countries discussed various topics. Initially, I was nervous, but I reminded myself, I've worked too hard to doubt myself now. And then I spoke. The words came out clearly, confidently. I didn't struggle to find the right words. I understood what others were saying without feeling lost. People listened to me, nodded in agreement, and even asked me questions. It was an incredible moment. That was the day I knew I had achieved fluency. 6 months after I started my journey, I applied for my dream job again. This time, I wasn't the same Carlos who had walked in nervously months ago. I wasn't the guy who hesitated, who felt small, who couldn't find the right words. No, this time I walked into that interview room with confidence. I sat in front of the interviewer not as someone who feared English, but as someone who had mastered it. I spoke clearly. I answered every question with ease. I wasn't just speaking English, I was commanding it. And I could see it in their eyes. They were impressed not just with my language, but with my determination, my persistence, my transformation. A few days later, I got the call, and I will never forget that moment. "Carlos, congratulations, you got the job." For a second, I couldn't believe it. My dream job. The same company that rejected me before, but now they wanted me. My starting salary was $6,000 per month, $6,000 more than I had ever imagined earning. I just stood there, holding my phone, trembling, my eyes full of tears. The first thing I did was call my parents. "Mum, Dad, I did it." My mother started crying on the other end. My father, a man who rarely shows emotions, simply said, "We always knew you could." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for them too. With my first salary, I bought my father a beautiful leather jacket he had always wanted, but never bought for himself. For my mother, I bought a silver bracelet. She had sacrificed so much for me, for our family, and now it was my turn to give back. When I handed them the gifts, they refused at first. "We don't need anything, son," they said. But I shook my head. "No, this is my way of saying thank you. Thank you for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." And that was the moment I understood. It was all worth it. Every struggle, every late night, every moment of frustration, every time I felt like giving up, it was all worth it. Key lessons from my journey. Now let me share the most important things I learned in my journey that helped me become fluent in English in just a few months. 1. Mindset is everything. Most people fail to learn English because they believe they can't. I used to think the same way, but the moment I changed my mindset, everything changed. I told myself, English is not difficult. I can learn it just like any other skill. I stopped saying I am bad at English and started saying I am improving every day. If you think you can't do it, you won't. But if you believe you can, you will find a way. 2. Surround yourself with English. I made English a part of my daily life. I changed my phone's language to English. I watched only English content. I listened to English songs even if I didn't understand all the lyrics. I followed English-speaking content creators on social media. Every day I was feeding my brain with English. I also made sure to speak and think in English. Whenever I looked at an object, I would name it in English. If I saw a dog, I would say, "That's a brown dog, it's running fast." Small things like this helped me build my vocabulary naturally. 3. Speaking without fear. Many people are afraid of making mistakes, but mistakes are part of learning. I used to be scared of speaking, but then I realized native speakers don't care if you make mistakes. They appreciate your effort. So I forced myself to speak. I spoke to store clerks in English. I asked strangers for directions in English. And I even started talking to myself in English whenever I was alone. The more I spoke, the better I became. 4. Active listening and shadowing. Listening is just as important as speaking. I trained my ears to understand spoken English by listening to English podcasts, audiobooks, and conversations. But I didn't just listen passively, I practiced shadowing. Shadowing means listening to a sentence and repeating it immediately, mimicking the pronunciation and rhythm. This helped me improve my accent and fluency. 5. Expanding my vocabulary intelligently. At first, I tried memorizing long lists of words, but I quickly realized that was useless. Instead, I learned words in context. I focused on phrases instead of single words. For example, instead of memorizing the word excited, I learned phrases like, "I feel so excited today," and "That movie made me really excited." Learning in context made it easier to remember and use words naturally. 6. Grammar without textbooks. I didn't spend hours studying grammar books. Instead, I learned grammar naturally by listening and speaking. When I made a mistake, I noted it and corrected myself. For example, I used to say, he go to work. When someone corrected me, I understood the correct sentence, he goes to work. The best way to learn grammar is by using the language, not memorizing rules. 7. Consistency over perfection. Some people try to learn everything perfectly before they start speaking. That's a mistake. I didn't wait until I was perfect. I started speaking from day one. Even when I only knew a few words, I used them. I made a rule. Every day I will do something in English. Some days I spoke for 15 minutes. Some days I wrote a short paragraph. Some days I listened to a podcast. The key was consistency. Even on days when I felt lazy, I still did something. You don't need expensive classes. You don't need a perfect environment. You just need a strong desire and a commitment to practice every day. Imagine yourself 8 months from now speaking English fluently, confidently. Imagine the opportunities that will come your way. Imagine how proud you will feel. Start today. Speak, listen, practice, and never give up. Your future self will thank you. This is not just about learning English, it's about changing your life. And now I want to say something to you. If I can do it, you can do it too. It doesn't matter where you start. It doesn't matter how poor you think your English is. What matters is that you start today, right now. I know it's hard. I know it feels impossible sometimes. But trust me, the only thing standing between you and fluency is consistency. Stop doubting yourself. Stop making excuses. Surround yourself with English. Speak, listen, read, write every single day. Make mistakes, learn from them, improve. Because here's the truth, the pain of discipline is temporary, but the pain of regret lasts forever. So what will you choose? Choose discipline. Choose growth. Choose success. Your journey to fluency starts now. If this story inspired you, like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'll be with you every step of the way,